Hello, Redwall online community. Foxpen here, coming at you with another episode of Foxpenmanship. Today's episode is going to be a very special one because I am sitting here with Vin, fellow Redwall online community member and Mossflower Odyssey veteran. Today we're going to be making a very incredible announcement for the Redwall Survivor forums as well as the Redwall online community as a whole. We have a new contest that has been announced. Vin is going to be our contest runner. I have him here. We're going to talk about the contest today. This is very exciting news. We haven't had one since, Heaven Sent was unfortunately destroyed by COVID. And of course, before that, we had MO4. Vin has named this one Warpath. Vin, how you doing today?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. It's really good to have you here, my diving buddy. This is fantastic. We haven't worked together for a few years. Vin and I go back a little bit. He was Kentigern McGrath in Beasts in the Crater, and he was also Vin the Otter, my fellow diver in Mossflower 2, back when I was Lume. Back in the old days.
Back in the day. Yeah, it's been a while. Sometimes it feels to me like that contest specifically, like Mossflower Odyssey 2, was only a couple of years ago, and then I think about it, and it was like at least, 5 or 6 years ago now? Maybe even longer?
At the very least. Yeah,
I
might have even been longer. I'm not entirely sure. Time hasn't had much meaning for me in the past year, to be honest.
Well, so when I was logging in to my account, I noticed that I never actually verified this account, so I went to verify it. And the email I got from Discord was 4 years ago. So MO4 was actually, if that's correct, was 4 years ago now. So even MO4 has been just the longest time away. But it doesn't feel like it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're faced with the stories and you keep in contact with the same people year after year, time just kind of rolls a little differently. But here I've drawn it up on my phone. Day 1 of MO2. First post was by Ortha, People Who Live in Glass Houses. June 7th, 2004. 14.
I was just, I don't remember being able to write anything at all in 2004. I'm not quite old enough to be able to do that. But yeah, that's 7 years ago now. Yikes.
That's madness. But I mean, that's great. And so you actually have experience in Mossflower Odyssey. And on that note, let's talk about the contest you are now hosting. This is the first contest you've ever hosted.
It is, yeah.
That's exciting. What on earth inspired you to do this? Why start a contest yourself?
So this whole concept that I'm sort of bringing to this one with the whole new world, and all these species that we have that we don't necessarily get to see, that's probably the big thing that people think, but also a sort of whole new culture and world to sort of explore. It's something that I've wanted to do with the Survivor contest for a while now. I feel like the way that these things are set up is just perfectly set up to explore, not just Mossflower, but sort of Mossflower-esque places from around the world. So drawing inspiration from other places than just the British Isles. And that's something I've wanted to see in Redwall Survivor contest for a while now. I think it's also a very daunting task. So it hasn't necessarily happened yet. We saw it like maybe once a while ago with the Vulpine Imperium stories, I think they're called. But sorry, I just lost my train of thought already. Great.
It's very exciting news, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's help you. Why? Because this is really exciting. This is the first New World setting that at least Redwall Survivor has experienced. Why specifically the New World? Why North America? And does your New World contest include South America and the Caribbean, perhaps?
So why North America? The reason actually isn't as exciting as you might think. I have this old Peterson's Field Guide to North American Mammals handbook that I own, and I've owned since I was a kid. My grandma gave it to me a long time ago. And I was just going through my room the other day and looking at all my old books, and I opened it up and I saw all these different kind of mammals, and I was like, these would be kind of cool to see in a contest. And I've always wanted to do a contest like not in Mossflower. Why don't I just do that contest that I've been, tossing around in my head for a while now? So maybe not the most exciting of origin stories, but I don't know. I'm still excited for it.
Yeah, why not is a perfectly legitimate reason,
Yeah,
actually.
why not?
Many, many great things have come from why not. Why
Yeah.
a new contest in general? Like, especially because Heaven Sent, the previous Mossflower Odyssey
Mhm.
#5, it got killed because of COVID. It was no one's fault, but you're taking a pretty big
Yeah.
step here.
No, I remember I actually had gotten into Heaven Sent, and I was one of the people that was writing in the contest. And I think I was actually one of the first to drop out specifically for the reason of the COVID totally killed my schedule. And I know other people as well. Just it was a total paradigm shift for a lot of people where we had to sort of figure out what was going on. And I think, we're sort of a year on now, even longer, a year and a couple of months. And I think a lot of people have sort of figured out how they're moving about in this new situation, I guess. And then also, I mean, everything's starting to open up a little bit more, at least here in Canada, where I am. So I feel like right now it's sort of a time where everyone's starting to have a little more time and do more. And I'm hoping that that is the case for everyone in the Redwall survivor community as well. But it's also partly based on my schedule. I'm going to be pretty busy come next year, so I probably wouldn't be able to run it then. And I'm thinking, I mean, I have the stuff. Why not just run it now? Again, a why not?
Yeah, well, that's a perfectly good reason. You have the time. And yeah, I know you're in Alberta. I'm over on the East Coast in Ontario. We're finally starting to open up. Ontario's very
Yeah.
behind Alberta. But yeah, like yeah, you have the time. Other people are going to have the time. The world is reopening after this wretched plague that has
Yeah.
just wrecked so much of our lives for so long.
Yeah.
And I think too, you're only going to have 6 contestants, 6
Yeah.
writers in this contest. Are you hoping that that's going to help? Are you hoping that's going to like have only the most motivated in? Why only 6 contestants?
So there are a couple of reasons. The first and foremost, I think, being just the whole um, the thing where I don't necessarily know how many people are going to be able to apply. I don't know once they do apply what their schedules are going to be like. And I figure with 6 people, it's going to be a little bit easier once the contest starts to give people a little bit of grace in terms of time.
Mm,
If you have like 10 people in your contest, that's it. It may only be 4 more, but it's still a lot more writing that has to get done and a lot more voices that have to be heard. So it's sort of complicated. The more people you have, I feel like the more it complicates, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I also feel like this is our first contest back since the whole coronavirus thing, and we're all going to be finding our feet, so to speak. And I think with less people, it's going to be a little bit easier to do that. Just cut down a little bit on the complications. And then there are a couple of other reasons as well that have to do with the story. For instance, you'll notice when you go into the grand introduction post that I make, there's a description of 2 different nations. And on one hand, you have the nation in the north, and then on the other hand, you have the nation in the south. And so one of the ways that this contest is going to be structured is it's sort of going to be structured in teams. So we're going to have 3 categories from the North Nation and 3 categories from the South Nation. And because I am going to be playing with this new structure, I think having less people is going to be a little bit easier on me when I'm running it. So I'm not having to manage 5 different people on each team. I can just manage a couple.
Yeah, not a bad strategy. You keep it
Yeah.
a little tight, keep it a little closer, and it certainly helps move the plot along, as you were saying earlier, when there's fewer voices vying to be heard above the din.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's very exciting. A lot of what you said, yeah, this is the first contest as we step back
Mhm.
out of doors, back out of quarantine and into the society again. Um, what kind of contestants are you expecting, and what kind of contestants are you hoping for? I mean, are you expecting people like me who've been in the ROC forever, who've been part of our Redwall forever? Are you hoping for more of a new guard moving in? Are you hoping for people that are experienced writers or who are just venturing into this grand endeavor for the first time? What are you hoping for, and what do you want?
Um, so I would say honestly, coming into this, I don't have a lot of expectations just because I don't necessarily know where everybody is at with their schedules and stuff like that. And I don't want to be too hopeful and be like, I want everybody to apply, because obviously that's the ideal. You get a million different applications. Um, as difficult as that would be on the judges, I think it shows the level of enthusiasm that people have for a contest like this. But in general, I'm just hoping that people who are excited about the idea, um, and excited about the ability to sort of explore this new world that we're creating, because it really is going to be a collaboration in world building almost, and that's going to be a big part of what's going on because this isn't Mossflower, right? Nothing that is going to be happening in the world of Warpath is going to be the same as what happens in the Redwall books or even in any of the other Redwall contests. So I'm looking for people who are excited by that, by sort of like the idea that they can come in and play in this massive sandbox that I've created and make an awesome story.
Fantastic. So you're looking for people who want to build a new world that, I mean, it's Redwall, but it's just inspired by Redwall. Is it actually going to be a Redwall story? What are your thoughts on that?
So one thing you might have noticed in the title is that it doesn't actually have the word Redwall in it. So, or Mossflower or anything like that. In the past, you get the contests, Redwall Survivor this or Redwall Survivor that, Redwall Revolutions, Mossflower Odyssey. And I made a pretty conscious decision to not include that. And so I'm just calling it Survivor Warpath. And it's not necessarily because I want to cut away all inspiration from Redwall or anything like that, because obviously that's going to be a huge inspiration for everybody who's going to be joining and writing. And it was a huge inspiration for myself, coming up with the world. But also, there's a lot of things that we get used to as Redwall writers, I feel like. And a lot of things that we keep coming back to that I sort of want people to step away from and try something new, so that this world is standalone, I guess, if that makes any sense, where
Yeah.
it exists in of itself and not just because of Redwall. So I don't want it to be just another Redwall contest. I want this to be Warpath, right?
That's fantastic. It also speaks to well, just the world and the history of discovering the new world. With the Americas were here long before they were discovered. Things were going on, things were happening. Meanwhile, in Europe, things were going on and happening there, and nobody even knew about the other. But yeah, that is fantastic. Redwall inspired, but at the same time very unique and its own culture and its own story to tell. I think that's very important, especially because there's so many Survivor contests and so many Redwall fan fictions too. That we needed something a little more refreshing. And on that note, what do you think is going to make Warpath unique above all other Survivor contests? Is it the fact that it's in the Americas, or are you expecting something really special from the writers that are coming into this?
Um, I mean, I think there are a bunch of different things that sort of are going into making Warpath unique, I mean, I've got a completely new structure that I'm going to be playing with. So it's not going to be the traditional Survivor structure that everybody's used to. Like you said, we have the new species and the new setting and the new world, really. And I think that is all going to sort of come together to make something that isn't like other contests, because it really is. I feel like for a lot of the other contests, the Mostar Odysseys, for instance, it's sort of an exploration of the world that exists in Redwall and expanding on the world that exists in Redwall. But with Warpath, I'm hoping at least that it's going to be something completely new, where it's less of an expansion and more of a creation, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the first thing that comes to my mind when I think what makes up a Redwall Survivor contest is you always have the characters who sort of play with this notion of, Woodlander and Vermin. I feel like that's a staple of any Redwall Survivor contest. I feel like it's a staple of most good Redwall fan fiction that you'll read. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think it's one that is worth exploring. But at the same time, that's the kind of thing I don't want to see when we're doing Warpath, because that is Redwall and that is Mossflower, right? When you cross the ocean to a place that Redwall and Mossflower have never touched, how do the dynamics between species and different cultures change, right? I think that's going to be something that is unique, is just the way that characters interact with each other. It's not going to be by these sort of set, defined dynamics that we have set up for us in Redwall.
Yeah, this is definitely aiming to be certainly on the path to be a very interesting experience. And as someone who's going to be reading very voraciously along, it excites me to let the author, to see what the authors have in store for us, to see what kind of unique spin on things they're going to do. I was joking around with a few of the folks the other night. We're thinking, let's make a bunch of crazy Yahoo characters, right? Like they're going to be rednecks, ha ha ha, won't that be funny? But at the same time, there's so many different cultures specific to the New World that you don't see in Europe. We're both Canadian. Yes, go us. But
Well, I'm
since
actually not Canadian. I just live in Canada.
close
But
enough, buddy.
yeah, I've got permanent residency. It's basically the same thing.
But you're from North America anyway.
Yes.
Since the New World, the Americas, is so expansive, this is really relevant to us as North Americans. We're going to see new cultures and new dynamics between species. Do you expect any actual, say, native culture to be represented by any of the contestants? Or even are you planning on having any in your narrative posts, right? Because there's so many different native cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And like you have Mesoamerican territory all the way up north to the Inuit territory in the actual territories of Canada, say. Do you want to see these things handled? And if so, do you think it would be healthy for this kind of competition?
So this is a really complicated question, actually. And it's one that it's probably the biggest reason why it took me so long to actually decide, I want to make this contest. Because I've been thinking about this contest for years now. And I wasn't sure how I felt about this specific question. And I feel like there's going to be a temptation in a lot of ways to sort of make it not necessarily a Cowboys versus Indians sort of thing, but I don't know. I kind of want to stay away from necessarily copying or taking too much from Indigenous culture. Partly because I'm a little bit nervous for how that would portray in a Redwall Survivor contest. I don't have any control over it. And that's not something like, let's say something comes up that's maybe not the best representation. It's something that for me personally is pretty important because, I do have Indigenous roots. And I don't want to have to deal with that if something bad comes up. But also, I don't want to have to deal with it because I want this to be a creation of something new, right? If you think about Redwall, it's not just copying the culture of Britain, it's creating its own culture, right? It can be reminiscent of Britain to a certain extent. It's not British culture. It's Redwall culture. So that's why I sort of want to sort of avoid taking wholesale from any of these cultures. I think you'll definitely see inspiration from it, probably from authors and from myself. But I know for me, I'm going to build these two nations that are sort of going to war in this contest. I really tried to build it from the ground up, not necessarily say I'm gonna take this aspect and this aspect from real world cultures. What I tried to do was sort of build it from, take the setting that they're in and sort of build it from before they had culture, then sort of expand that into the current day of the contest. That makes any sense at all.
It does. It absolutely does. And I totally see where you're going. You don't want to see cultural appropriation. No one ever wants to see that. Inspiration's good, inspiration's different, but appropriation is never a good thing. And yeah, you're trying to create something unique. You're trying to create Warpath. It's not Redwall Survivor, it's Survivor inspired by Redwall. So
Yes.
I do understand it. It does make sense. And yeah, I totally understand it. You mentioned you have some Native American blood in you. I have a drop of it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, I'm still really reluctant to say I would represent any kind of Native culture. My character Lume in Mossler Odyssey 2, Into the Depths, or Into the Deep rather, she was very mildly inspired by Algonquin culture. But even then, it was just slightly inferred. There was never any actual touching upon it. It wasn't part of her character. It was just a little bit of the backstory to help flesh her out. And some of that was a main reason was because it wasn't required for the character. And then also, I was very, very nervous. If you're representing some culture that isn't your own, you have to approach it with not only respect but caution, because any misstep could be construed as you being an ignorant idiot,
right,
or you being intentionally foolish.
Right. I would never think that any author who would be writing for this contest would be intentionally disrespectful or anything like that. It's just like you're saying, when you're trying to write from a culture that is not your own, it can be, it's just a whole new dynamic to your writing that makes things difficult. And you can't catch everything. And
like, learning is good, but it's not really the appropriate time to become an anthropologist.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I totally understand, and I really do hope people take your answer and appreciate the uniqueness that you're trying to create with Warpath. Inspiration's good, appropriation never is. But at the same time, I know people are going to want to seize the opportunity when we venture into the new world.
Yeah.
But, and then again, like, at the same time, I know there's authors in the ROC especially that are fully capable of writing amazing characters. They will go out, they will spend like literal days and nights studying things just so they can get a better handle on it. And of course, if there's any actual like natives out there that want to write a character that's inspired by their own culture, that's a whole other kettle of fish right there in and of itself, no, isn't it?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I'm gonna, turn away any app that has, influence from these sort of cultures. But what I'm really looking for when I'm doing this contest is to build something new and to build new cultures. And that I feel like if we're lifting too much from real world cultures, then we're not going to be able to build our own. If that makes any I think
it does. It makes sense. Give yourself some credit, man. It makes perfect sense.
No, so one example I would say of something that is not necessarily inspired by indigenous culture, but is reminiscent of certain indigenous cultures that will come up in the contest is I'm gonna tell you all a category that's gonna be out there right now. I'm still writing up the category primers, and I'm writing up the species recommendation guides for the categories. So we probably won't see those until Monday, but I'm gonna talk about one category right now. Is there's this category for the North that is the hunters, basically, and that's not what they're called, but that's essentially what they are. And what they do is they go around and they hunt big mammals. So they're hunting moose and they're hunting seals, and stuff like that. And the way that they do that is reminiscent of, how Eskimo would hunt seals, right? But that's not necessarily because I'm saying, oh, this is like Eskimo culture. It's because, it makes sense that this is how their culture would build, right? They're living up in the north, in the cold, in the wastelands of, the Arctic tundra. And what do you eat? You gotta eat seals, right? So it's sort of like that's sort of the kind of thing that I'm looking for, where it can be reminiscent of this real world culture, but because it has to make sense within the world that I've set up, right?
Yeah. Oh, it does. It does make sense. Like of all the Inuit culture, the Eskimo included. Yeah, like obviously you're living in a cold place. There's
Yeah.
already all these cultures set. There's going to be certain similarities, regardless of how fictional the authors are creating this new world. But simultaneously, yeah. And then of course, the more south you move, still like in Canada, we have the land between, and above the land, north of the land between, that's the dark north, and it's just called that because the forests get really thick, and the mammals, the wildlife there, actually their coloration is a lot darker. You have more moose north of the land between, where south of the land between you have more deer, which are a lighter colored creature, right?
Yeah.
And it would make more sense too. A character that's from the north would be influenced by the north in culture, and even what species it is, the author is going to have to take that into consideration. So this hunter category or creature category that you've chosen, I do expect the authors are going to have to put a lot of thought into this, because Warpath is so unique in its setting.
Mm-hmm. And really, for all the categories, I'm making it so that they have to sort of put their thought into how their character and their species interacts with the category and the story as a whole.
Now, you mentioned Monday, the categories, you intend to release them earliest
Yeah.
on Monday. It's only Thursday now. We're recording this on the 15th of what month is it? July. It probably won't be released until the next week, so Friday. So, if you can give me some spoilers, please do. Why the categories that you've introduced specifically? Is it just to inspire the authors? Is it just to make them think? Or is it to really try and wring an amazing story out of every aspect of the contest?
So for the categories that I've chosen, I wanted to sort of expand the nations that these categories are going to be part of. And what I wanted to do is, because you have these two different nations that are going to be going to war, and it's called Warpath for a reason. They're going to start at the starting line, and the finish is going to be they're going to meet in battle at the end, right? I don't think that's any secret. Just going based off of the name, that's what's going to happen. But when you look at these two nations, what I've really tried to do is sort of put them almost into ideological conflict with each other. So they are almost...
It's 7 o'clock.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. A while ago, I set my computer to turn on to tell me what time it is, and I don't know how to turn it off. So sorry
No
for that.
worries, no worries.
Yeah, so these two nations are sort of really wanted them to be opposites of each other and sort of almost two different ideas of how almost freedom is attained. And I think you're going to see that more when I release the prologues. But I wanted to keep that up with the categories. And so the way that I sort of design the categories is to be put in direct conflict with the categories of the other nation. So I mentioned the hunters that you're going to see in the north, where they have these big mammals like moose and bears and seals and walruses, that you have to either fight off or kill to eat. And then in the south, the opposite category, I'm going to tell you guys another category now, would be the Beastmasters. And, you don't necessarily see those kind of big, massive mammals down in the south because that's a little bit more of a disadvantage in hot places. You need all that body weight in the north because it's cold. And in the south, you see a lot smaller, more interesting mammals, insects and snakes and bugs and stuff like that. So almost be a counterpoint and in what's the opposite of parallel? Perpendicular
Yep.
to it's been a while since I took geometry. So yeah, so sort of to be put in contrast with the hunter is you have this category of the Beastmaster. And what the Beastmaster's role is not to hunt and kill animals, but to, sort of harness their power and use them to help in whatever way. Specifically, we're probably going to see that used for war, because that is the nature of the beast in this contest. But it's sort of like in opposition to each other, right? And they're sort of placed so that they, I guess, the fight will be natural, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Oh, it does. And I know you're trying not to spoil anything, but simultaneously, are you going to, you have the categories, you've given us
Mhm.
two. We have the hunters and the beastmasters. Are
Yeah.
there any specific species that you're going to be asking for? Like in the past, MO4, the Beasts in the Craters, we had the boars, and they were still
Mhm.
very feral creatures. In the
Yeah.
Redwall books, Swart Sixclaw had, I think it was Swart Sixclaw anyway, he had the dirge collars, which were like these feral, mad ferrets that he'd sick on people. There are seals that are feral. There are some birds and snakes, like
Mhm.
swans, that are still very feral. Are you gonna have or even want feral animals in this contest, or is it just going to be like a free for all? Like, are you going to be like, yeah, you can be a moose if you want. You could be a cicada that's just popped out of the ground after 17 years of sleeping. Sure.
So I am going to have to place some restrictions on it just for practical reasons. I mean, if I'm getting a moose and a cicada and, those two make it into how does that even work? Right? That's a whole logistical thing that you have to figure out. And it has the potential, I think, personally, just to make everything a mess. And as much as I want authors to do what they want in this contest and sort of, go for broke, in a lot of ways, I am adminning the contest, and I don't want to have too much trouble with all of this. And I think allowing, giant moose and cicadas in, would just be a pain in my ass. So
Well, there go all my character applications right there.
yeah. But I think there's also story reasons for it as well. It's not just, I don't want to have to deal with this. It's I mentioned earlier with the hunter application, for instance, you know, their job is to hunt these big animals. And so it doesn't really make sense for there to be a moose application when the entire well, not the entire, but a big part of the culture of, the Northlands is going to be hunting moose, right? It doesn't make total sense. And then conversely, if you go down south, it doesn't necessarily make sense for a scorpion or a tarantula or something like that to be a part of the southern nation when there's the Beastmaster category who sort of and their job is to use the scorpions and tarantulas and animals like that for their own purposes, right? So it's not totally just I don't want to deal with it. There's also story reasons as well, and I'm going to be posting a more comprehensive explanation of what I'm looking for in species with the categories, because I do know it's it seems pretty broad. And I am trying to leave it pretty broad, but there are going to be some restrictions like bugs. I don't necessarily want to see any bug applications, even though that could be interesting. It's not really what I'm looking for this contest, or the big animals like moose or mountain lions, stuff like that, right? I do think the cool thing about North American fauna is even if you don't get to be that super big animal, there's almost always a smaller, similar, congruent version of that animal that you can look at, right? Like I mentioned mountain lions, you look at the mountain lion and, maybe you can't be that big cat, but, there are other wild cats that exist in North America. There are tons of them. You have lynx, you have bobcats, you have ocelots and jaguarundis, right?
Very good point.
There's so much diversity in North American wildlife that I don't think anybody is going to be too restricted by not being able to write, as a deer or as a bear or something like that, right?
Fair. It's very fair. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are going to have to be restrictions. I'd love to be a moose. I would. I'd literally just charge around every single post yelling moose, and no one could stop me. But at the same time,
how would another
it
animal
has to
even talk
be
to a moose? Those things are like 500 times the size of most animals, right?
exactly. Like, how would a moose even interact with, say, a field mouse or like
Yeah.
what's a teeny tiny creature we have a chipmunk. We have chipmunks here. I don't know if they have chipmunks in Europe, but we definitely have chipmunks here in North America. How does a moose interact with a chipmunk? So yeah, there are obvious limitations, and I'm glad. Part of me is glad you're imposing that. I mean, part of me is just screaming moose, but also not.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe one day somebody will make a contest that is just big animals. But that would be up to them and not to me. So
Now, why? Okay, so the contest is called Warpath, and you've said yourself that like the climax, the story is probably going to be when the two parties meet and clash on the battlefield. Why a story that's going to be building up to a premise of violence when other contests, say especially MO4, why it was so violent? Why another violent go at it?
I'm gonna be honest. I took part in MO4. I wrote Kentucker and McGrath, and this whole story is almost a direct offshoot of the fact that I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get this big final battle at the end of MO4. It was an idea I had kind of floated, and I don't think too many people were that interested in it, and that's fair. But, I figured if I'm running a contest and this is something that I want to see as a reader, not so much as a writer, but as a reader, this is something I'm really interested in. Why can't I just do this myself and have this be the end game? But also I see it, not just as, me getting what I want from a reading perspective. Obviously there is a little bit of that, but I also think just the way that I've set the story up, it's sort of a representation of this clash of ideals, and we're gonna like I mentioned, I've really set these two nations up to be in opposition to each other. And if you read the introduction, it's not like they want to go to war. They've sort of coexisted for a long time, and there's the natural boundary of the green forest in between them. And they're sort of being forced into it, and they have no choice because of the way that the environment around them is changing, and it's forcing them. In the case of the southern nation, it's forced them upwards, and in the case of the northern nation, it's forced them downwards. And these two cultures are so different that they almost can't coexist, right? So it's sort of a representation of these two different ideals, and that's what this final battle is going to be. They can't exist at the same time. It has to be one or the other.
Yeah, I definitely noticed the natural disasters and well, climate change causing this exodus, forcing this clash. Was your decision to include the flooding of the north and then the drying up of the south, was that actually inspired at all by actual worldly climate change, or was that just like a convenient catalyst for you?
I mean, I think from a story perspective, it's kind of a convenient catalyst, but it's definitely something that I was thinking about because of what we're seeing in the real world. I was watching a documentary the other day about the permafrost layer up in Canada and in Russia and all these northern countries, and how it's kind of melting, and it's completely changing the way of life of people as it's melting. And it's just it doesn't seem like a big deal when you say it, like, oh, the permafrost layer is melting. But then you go and you look at the effects, and it's like these massive effects on the people who live in these areas, and their way of life is totally threatened by it. And I sort of thought that was something really, I found something kind of deep in that, where what do you do when your entire way of life is being threatened? And that's sort of what I wanted to draw out in this contest, is sort of these two nations, they're completely desperate, and it's because things that are completely outside of their control are forcing them into this cataclysmic event, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, these are really just two nations that are desperate for survival, and it's a survivor contest. And I thought that those themes were just really meshed well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what do you do when your enemy isn't something you can fight off? How do you fight a flood? How do you fight drought, especially? And we've been stuck in a drought for several years now, and meanwhile also, especially in Ontario, we've been in a drought, and yet at the same time our green belt is flooding to the point where entire 1,000-acre farms are being just swept off the map in the blink of an eye. There's been the lake levels are lowering, and the fish are dying, and there's also all these other natural disasters that are coming along. Whether or not they're pushed forward by humanity or not, it's irrelevant, because you can't fight nature once it's taken its stand.
Think about the fires in Australia and California. I think were two of the ones that I sort of think of immediately when I think of what's going on around the world. Just these massive fires that people can't really do anything about. Like, you can try to stave it off, but yeah,
There's only so much you can do.
so much you can do.
I've been privileged enough that I'm a forestry technician. I'm college educated, and I have taken forest fire sciences. I'm also I can be a backup forest fighter, not frontline, but line B basically, if it's called to. But at the same time, like what we do to prevent forest fires, we're really good at preventing forest fires. But when a forest fire does start, because we're so good at preventing them, these new forest fires are so incredibly devastating that they're 10 times worse than if they had been ignited 100 years ago. And it definitely makes you think.
The things I always found fascinating about forest fires is, they're not usually caused by people.
No, 9 out of 10 forest fires are natural disasters.
Natural, and they're almost set up as ways to cleanse the forest, in my understanding at least. You probably know better than me, considering you're educated in college and all that. And I'm just an English major, so I don't really know anything about it. But from my understanding is, they're sort of set up to renew the forest in a way. And when you prevent fires, that protects people, but it sort of messes with the natural order of things,
Absolutely. There are certain species of trees that only reproduce after a forest fire. Was it jack pine is a really good example. The pine cones are so waxed, they're so waxy, they're so tightly shut that only the power of fire can open up the cones and let them release their seeds. So they only reproduce after a forest fire. You can do as many controlled burns as you want, but at the same time, it's never going to replicate the effects of a natural forest fire. And then natural forest fires help get rid of the lodgepole pine beetles in BC. And I mean, BC is pretty much on fire almost all the time these days. So at the same time, not in the right places because we've inadvertently steered forest fires on different paths than they've historically taken. And then you have things like, well, now where I live, you have things where there's insect invasions because it's warming up here, and we've introduced species accidentally, like emerald ash borers. All the ash trees in Ontario are pretty much gone. So there's this whole thing where now all these other animals that depended on ash trees are now trying to adapt, and they either will or they won't, and it's literally do or die. And that's the difference between man-made and natural disasters. They're both absolutely devastating, but for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
I'm very excited, actually, now that we've started to talk about the environment. That's my jam. But yeah, I'm very excited to see how Warpath, how the characters deal with this exodus that they're being forced on, or forced into, rather.
I mean, I'm excited to see that too, because I'm going to have absolutely no control over that. I want, one of the things that I really want to see in this contest is sort of, the authors coming into this, and they're going to be writing the characters and they're going to be telling the story. So, how people are reacting to these environmental challenges and cultural challenges that they're going to be facing, it's going to be completely up to the author. So I'm as much in the dark, as you are. So I'm excited as well.
It's going to be fascinating one way or another.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of what the contestants are up to, are you hoping, or are you expecting, or are you just going to mandate some innovation? So, like, if you remember MO4, which I'm sure you do, you were there, we had things like not just double author posts, but we had triple author collaborations, which hadn't been seen before. We had a post where literally every single contestant contributed to. So it was like a 10 author collaboration. And those are just the posts themselves. Do you expect or demand even innovations like that to help make this contest unique and to help cement it as one of the greats?
I wouldn't say that I demand any kind of innovation. I think that everybody who is going to be working on this contest should be doing exactly what they're comfortable with and what they signed up for. But that being said, I would love to encourage and, love to see innovation on the part of the authors. When I think about one of my, my favorite experiences throughout, my time writing for contests, and, I didn't necessarily get a whole lot of time writing in any of the contests that I've ever been in. I was voted out first as Vin, and I was voted out first as Kentigern. And
And
then
that was a tie,
the universe was
and
so
it was a double vote. Okay, McGrath didn't count.
upset at the chance that I might make it past the first round that COVID happened, and shut down the contest completely. So I really haven't gotten the chance to write a lot, but the one thing that really stuck with me with the writing is, not just just collaboration in general, I think, is really cool. And the things that I remember from the contest when I'm writing are when I collaborated. Immediately my mind goes to my death post. When Kentigern died, I wrote that with Aldridge, and it was sort of because there was a runoff. If you remember, I don't know if everyone listening is familiar with this. In the first week of Mossflower Odyssey 4, my character, Kentigern McGrath, and another character, Aldridge, actually tied in the vote. It was an exact tie. And so it went into a runoff. And the audience didn't actually know the outcome of the thing because, the moderator was like, yeah, we've had a tie. We're going to do a runoff. And so we were like, why don't we not reveal who actually died? And why don't we come and write a post together, and they're just going to have to find out who died. And we had our two characters actually have a fight. And that was something I don't think that has really happened before. And I imagine that's the sort of thing you're talking about when you're talking about innovation. And for me as a writer, that was just an awesome experience. And so I would definitely encourage people to do stuff like that. Just because, not even for the story's sake, just for your own sake. I mean, it's fun.
Absolutely. MO4 was pretty innovative in that way. There was a lot of new things in the contest. And I do remember, the Aldridge versus Kentigern McGrath fight.
Mhm.
Not just because Aldridge and the Black Whiskers was paired up with Kentigern, and so I lost my partner right off the bat. But it was very tense and very exciting. Even as a behind the scenes contestant, we weren't entirely sure what was going to happen right off until the post hit the board.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun, and I can't encourage people enough, to go out and try new things. And, obviously it won't be mandated. I'm not going to say you have to do something cool and exciting and new. If you're coming in and you're just like, I want to tell my story and my character and, help build this world, and I'm going to do it in, I'm just going to make my posts normal as usual, then that's totally fine too. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong way to approach this. As long as you're coming into it, ready to create.
It's a good point, but at the same time, allow me a counterpoint. You might not demand something innovative, but at the same time, the audience might
That is,
just.
I was gonna bring that up. I'm not in control of. Not really in control of who the audience is voting for. Maybe the audience doesn't necessarily want to see risks, or maybe they want to see you take all of the risks that you possibly can. It's hard to say. And, that's part of why the competition of the Survivor contest is so fun, is you never really know what the audience is thinking until the votes come in. And so you have to write your story and take risks or play it safe, and that's just part of the game.
Yeah.
So whether or not that's something that you're comfortable with, that's going to be up to you, and the audience is really going to decide who lives and who dies.
Absolutely. And there have been upsets before. You go back to Mossflower Odyssey 1, Journey to Karagul, the character Risk, haha, the irony here, possibly one of the best writers in the contest. Certainly one of the contestants' favorite characters. All of us cast members, we really liked Risk. He was the first one out, and it shocked us as contestants. We had not we were blindsided. We did not see it coming, and it actually disrupted a bunch of plans because we didn't fathom for a second Risk would be gone so early, and yet there he went. You never know what the audience is up to. You don't know what they're thinking exactly, and you can only kind of go based on what the comments on the board go, like the chapter reviews, what all the hubbub says. But even then, people can be very whimsical, and they can change their minds from week to week.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, is the people who are actually doing the reviews only actually represent, a fraction of the community,
Mm-hmm.
there are all kinds of people who are voting on these things and not necessarily getting, they're not necessarily speaking for everybody. When you think about, I would think immediately of Heaven Sent, with I think the bandit category is most of the people who posted on the forum were all super excited about Antonia. And I was excited about Antonia. I think most people were excited about Antonia. It was a really, really good application. But then when it came down to the vote, it was pretty close between Antonia and Smooths. And maybe the people who had been posting on the boards were maybe a little more vocal, but then there's always that silent vote that you never know about that can always surprise you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And it's something I really wanted to lean into this contest is, letting the audience come in and help shape this story. I mentioned it in the introduction post how there's going to be various different ways that the audience is going to be able to interact with the story, and not just, voting for who they want to see die. There's going to be all kinds of different ways that they're going to be able to take part. And this is part of this new structure that I'm talking about. And we're going to see that as the contest progresses. They'll be unveiled more, as we go on. But I really want the audience to join, partly because I love that idea of, the contestants never really know what's going on. But also with Warpath here, I think it's a pretty cool world. And, I've sort of laid some building blocks, I guess. But what I'm sort of hoping is going to happen is we have a contest and the authors come in and they sort of help build this world. And I want the audience to be able to interact and help shape the world in certain ways as well. So it's not, just the 6 authors who have every bit of say. And then, maybe we see more contests in the future set in this world. I don't know. I don't want this to just be a one-off contest where we only have, we have Warpath and wasn't that a neat footnote in the history of Redwall Survivor? I want this to be a community-built world that we can expand on,
You want to set some trends, understandable.
Yeah.
The setting alone allows for so much
Mhm.
uniqueness, and then like
Yeah.
your determination to encourage new cultures, and that alone, like this if this sets a trend, which I hope it does, it could, not to make a pun here, it could open up a whole new world of writing
Yeah.
contests in the ROC.
It could. And that's why I like to say it's a story it's not a Redwall story. It's set in the Redwall world. And the reason that I'm saying that is because, it's inspired by Redwall, but it's really going to be our community sort of building it and growing it. And I'm hoping that lasts longer than just this contest.
Fantastic excitement. Who knows what the future's going to hold. And
No.
on that note, Heaven Sent, after it unfortunately had to be canceled because of the
Mm-hmm.
Rona. Aaron was mentioning in the Discord, the Redwall Survivor Discord, which I'll post a link to in the description. He was saying like there was going to be a different format to the Survivor death situation. Normally, every Survivor contest, every MO, a chapter a week is written, and then someone's voted off at the end of every week until there's top 3 left. Aaron then revealed that actually it was going to be quite different, where there'd be like 3 people wiped out the first week, and then after 4 weeks, another 4 people would be wiped out of the story. And then weeks go by, and he was actually inferring that actually I was going to surprise everyone, and no one was going to die. Are there going to be surprises like that? Like, are you going to flip the format, the traditional manner of winning and losing this contest, or are you going to try and keep it more traditional so that people kind of have something more familiar to relate to in this very unique setting?
I mean, I like to go all in on things, for one, and I think that it's no secret, just based on the fact that there are only 6 people, that things aren't going to be exactly the same. And I'm not gonna delve into what exactly I have plans, because I do want that to come out, a little bit later when I want it to sort of be revealed. But yeah, it's not going to be like your traditional Survivor contest. It's a completely new structure, and it's completely new things to vote for, new things to vote against. I'm excited, and it might take a little bit of getting used to for a lot of people, but I really want to make something unique here, and help get the audience involved, and writers involved in the voting process as well. So I've really started to play with the structure of what makes a Survivor contest. So I'm hoping that it's well received. You never know until it happens, but I'm definitely not keeping this super traditional.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
New world, new contest. I figured, why not go all in and make it a new structure as well.
That's fantastic, and it adds to the excitement too. Us, the audience, we just don't know what's going to happen, and it's going to help build the audience and help build the traction of the story itself.
Yeah.
You're the contest runner. I assume you're not going to be writing in the contest as well.
No,
Yeah.
I will be writing 2 prologues, exactly 2 prologues, and that will pretty much be it from me. I obviously need to set the scene a little bit before the application phase starts, just so I want people to get a sort of a feel for each of the different nations, and a feel for their leaders, because I mentioned 2 characters by name in the introduction that I posted on the Redwall Survivor forums. And these 2 leaders are going to be, they're sort of representations, or microcosms almost, of the nation that they lead. And excuse me, I lost my train of thought while I coughed. Oh, lost it again. What was I talking about?
Microcosms.
Microcosm. That's not an easy word to come back from. Oh yeah, so I want these leaders to sort of represent their thing, and so their nations, and so I'm going to be writing these 2 prologues. One for Castor, who is the Wolverine King of the North, and then one for Kango Chainbreaker, who is the Hare, who is the leader of the South. And just so that the authors get a feel for the world, and get a feel for these characters, and get a feel for just little things that maybe they can use to inform or inspire them as they write their applications, so that they're not going into it blind, right? Because obviously, you're going into this whole new world, and having to reassess how you write applications, almost to a point. And I'm going to be writing these 2 prologues, sort of help them out a little bit there, And then from that point forward, I basically want all the writing to be the contestants. I don't really want to shape the story too much. What I've done is I've created this world, and I'm going to throw the contestants into this world, and I want them to make sense of it as they will, you know? And it's almost like, I feel like, in a sense, it's almost like I've never actually like DM'd any Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, but it's kind of that sort of concept where
you can maybe make the map, but in the story, it's the writer's tale.
I've got the map, and they can do whatever they want in that map within reason, you know? Obviously, it probably wouldn't make for a very good story if, one author decided, I'm going to go sit in the north of the land and do nothing. But I think I'm going to be pretty free on what these characters are going to be able to do and where they're going to be able to go. And I really want it to be all up to the authors. And as I mentioned before, to the audience as well. They're going to have some choice in what happens.
Have you decided? Usually for one of these Survivor contests, you have your application. You've decided everyone gets 2, which is pretty normal. Usually it's around 2 or 3, and with 6 contestants in the story, 2 apps seems pretty fair. Have you decided on a word limit for the application?
I had decided on it, and then as I was writing earlier today, I was writing out the category things, and I was like, is that a good word limit? It's tough because, you don't want to give them too many words, right? Because if you give them too many words, then I think there's the chance that they get lost with the application that they're writing. There's going to be a lot to go over in these applications, and I think, if you're giving them too much, they're just going to sort of spread out too much, and they're going to try to bite off more than they can chew. But then on the other hand, there's all this new content that they're going to have to be including to make their characters interesting. Because I know that I personally, one of the things that I'm looking for, and I'm in this, is not just your typical character, interesting character. Is this a character that I want to see? It's one of the things that I'm going to be looking for is and encouraging people to do is write things that they want to see in Warpath that maybe I haven't even thought of myself, and really make I really want to see them make the category their own, and not just do a character who is in the category, but I really want them to sort of expand on the category, if that makes any sense. And I think I say that a lot. But anyway, I think, dang it, I've lost my train of thought again.
I think where you're going with this, you want them to make it their own, as if they themselves had come up with the category. This is the author's chance to not just show off your writing skill, but show off your imagination. Make us want to see this character, and not just a character, but where they come from.
Yeah, I'm going to be giving, these categories are going to be giving you a job, sort of, so to speak. And, it's up to the authors to, write what kind of character is going to take up this job. What does this job entail? How do other people look at somebody who does something like this? How do they look at themselves? And so there's a lot that's going to be going into this. And so you don't want to give them too little, because, if you make your application, 500 words, that's not going to be enough for them to really explore. Maybe it would be, but so I had a word, and I was fairly set on it, and I second guessed myself. So I don't have a specific limit right now, but I don't think I for sure can say I'm not going to be giving more than 1,000 words. So don't be writing any novels,
Fair, very fair. Yeah, usually the average is around the 500 to 700 mark.
Yeah, I do have myself and the judges to think about. Where there's going to be less applications coming in, but still, if we got 22,000 word applications, that's pretty difficult. It's a lot of. So yeah, I had a set amount. Second guess myself when the categories come out. The rest of the categories, because I've talked about 2 here now. You'll see. Basically, I'll have a set word count by then for sure.
All right. Now, you're not applying, of course. Obviously, you shouldn't write in your own contest.
Yeah.
If you, Vin, my diving buddy, if you, my gladiator buddy, were to apply for this contest, if it wasn't yours, is there a particular dream app that you would concoct to enter this contest?
Oh man, this is tough. I have thought so much about the kind of, because I really had wanted to write in one of these, and I think for the foreseeable future, I'm not going to be writing in any contests, and that's why part of me was like, you know what, let's just make this world, and I'll run it. But so I thought a lot about, if there was ever a New World contest, what kind of character would I write? And there's so many different ideas that just I had, that I couldn't narrow it down to one thing. There's so many different species and so many different, ways that you could interpret just one species. Like we could get, conceivably in this contest, we could get 5 applications that are all one species that are completely unique and independent and, conflicting with each other. Right? And
No, absolutely.
It's hard to say there's one specific thing that I'm looking for. And it's hard to say that there's one specific thing that I would be able to write, because even just when I think about it, I come up with, in 30 seconds, I come up with 10 different ideas that I would love to write. I think there's so much freedom with this concept, and the fact that it is going to be completely new, that there's no way for me to say, this is a dream application, because, an application that I can dream up is going to be a completely different application than something that another person is going to dream up. And I almost don't want to see the applications that I can dream up, because I could write that. If I really wanted to see it, I want to see people coming in with their own dream applications, I guess.
Well put, Vin. Well put. Yeah. Yeah, if someone else comes up with an application similar to your own, it kind of deflates your ego just a wee bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Also, yeah, you're looking for uniqueness too. So, okay. How about this? Is there a specific animal that you're really hoping to see in the contest?
There was a specific animal that when I wanted to write in one of these that I really wanted to see, and I went and I put him into the contest anyway. So you're gonna see that specific animal later when I release the prologues. But just reaching out and expanding. One thing that I would say is, I think a lot of the species that we're gonna see are gonna have, sort of an innate allure to them. You think about like ocelots or lynx, these sort of quote unquote cool animals in North America that you can see. And I really want to see, I mean, I want to see those. Don't get me wrong. I do want to see those, but I don't want people to just think about those animals. I want to think, there are a lot of animals in North America that are super unique, even though they seem kind of boring. My first thought would be prairie dogs, right? You would think they're super bland, but they're actually super interesting with how they I mean, if you go and you look into prairie dogs and how they communicate with each other and how they, stay safe from predators and stuff like that, it could be a really interesting opportunity with this animal that you might think is mundane to come up with a completely cool, what is prairie dog culture, right? And sort of create this. So I don't want people to just go straight for, the cool animals. That's not to say that if somebody applies the prairie dog, they're automatically in, and that's definitely not to say if somebody applies an ocelot, they're not getting in. But what I'm looking for is people who are going to take the species that they've chosen and not just write a character that is that species. I want the species to be an innate part of the character that they're writing, and I want it to inform, I want the species that a character is to inform the way that they move through the world and the things that they do. If that makes any sense. I want it to be core to their identity. So you could take any species and I would be happy if that's what you're doing.
It's a solid argument. Yeah, like I mean, so many people will pick a species because they like it, and then or they know it's going to be a fan favorite. The Redwall Survivor Mossflower Odyssey, there's always this in joke. Everybody likes a female mustelid.
Yeah.
And they usually go very far.
It's true. Yeah.
And so like it's almost like people will write a female mustelid just because they know there's a chance that they'll be popular because of that.
That's something that I don't want to see. Just picking a cool species. I want there to be a reason why you've picked the species that you've picked, right? If we go and we think about, I'll bring up my own application that I did for Heaven Sent, Old One. Old One, I didn't pick a Wolverine because I thought Wolverines were cool. I do think Wolverines are cool. Obviously, I think they're cool. I made a Wolverine character for this contest. But he was a Wolverine because of the kind of character that I wanted to make. He was a Wolverine because I wanted to create this sort of almost mytho-historic character who sort of exists in a way that was different than everyone else. And so the species that I chose was intrinsic to who he was as a person, or as a beast, I guess, not as a person. We don't have people in Redwall, we have beasts. But it's sort of the fact that he was a Wolverine informed everything else about his character. It wasn't just he was a Wolverine who also sings and hunts other beasts. It was because he is a Wolverine, he does these things, right?
And I mean, it's a really good example because Old One was probably one of the most popular apps of the contest. I remember Old One, and I remember thinking, this is such a unique application. This is such a curious character. I need to hear more about him. And I know I love QQ. QQ as the Great Coincidences Hunter application in
Fantastic
Heaven
application.
Sent. And I love QQ. QQ is my heart and soul. But at the same time,
if I didn't have Old One in that category, QQ, and we were only voting for one winner based on applications, QQ would have gotten my vote. I loved QQ. Shout out to Great Coincidence for writing QQ and continuing to write QQ now that the contest was canceled. He took his character and he's doing his own story that you can find on his fan fiction page. I don't know that off the top of my head.
That's okay. I'll post a link in the description.
You should post a link in the description so people can check it out because QQ is an absolute joy.
He was.
Anyway,
and yet as much as I loved QQ, when it came down to deciding between the Old One and QQ, I did go with Old One in the end, I believe, if my memory serves, just because there was something about that application that seemed so mystical. There was this there was this magic to it. And yeah, I think part of it was being that like you kind of know he's a Wolverine because you're told, and then all these things fall into place because you know he's a Wolverine. And you started to introduce this new culture to him, like his singing, the great horned ones, his
Hmm.
old one, he doesn't have a name, and he's got this old culture all to himself. There was something very special about him. And I think people in Warpath have this opportunity to not just have applications like Old One, but to write an entire story like the energy that was behind Old One. Which to this day, people still talk about Old One and
I
QQ.
don't want
Everyone
to
loves
say, I
QQ.
don't want to say, Old One is the perfect application, because I that's a little bit too arrogant for me to say. But I think just the process that I had, where I was building him from his species up, right? Um, that's the sort of thing that I want to see, and so I would recommend people read Old One, not necessarily because I think it's an amazing thing. I do like Old One. It's one of the things that one of the things I've written in the last 5 years that I've been most excited about, and the fact that Heaven Sent got canceled is still makes me sad, because I was really excited about Old One and what I was going to do with him. But I would recommend people read Old One just to see what I'm looking for when it comes to building your character based on this new species that you're going to be writing, because everybody's going to be writing in a new species. Even if you're writing a badger, your badger is going to be different than the badgers of Redwall, because it's a different kind of badger. If you're writing a mole, it's going to be different because they're not the moles of Redwall. If you're writing a squirrel, it's going to be different because it's not the squirrels of Redwall. So I would recommend, if you're sort of lost on how to do that, I would say go look at Old One and see what I'm looking for is sort of building from the species up, and sort of seeing that, you have Old One is a Wolverine. What do Wolverines do? They hunt. Is that all that they do? Well, not necessarily. In this case, he also sings, right? And why does he do that? Because he hunts, right? Like it branches out from this one key part of his identity. And then another reason I would recommend people go read Old One is just because I have shamelessly lifted certain ideas from myself. So stuff like the Great Horned Ones, you're gonna see that in this contest, and that's just because I thought these ideas are so good, why let them be wasted on a dead contest?
That's absolutely wise. Whether or not you think Old One is a perfect app, he has been called by many in Redwall Survivor to be it's considered a perfect app,
Oh wow.
because it was so magical and unique in its presentation. So I'm actually going to post the link to the application for Old One in the description, so people can see this character and see what
Yeah.
you're talking about when you're saying about establishing culture based on species. But
Yeah.
he really is something unique. And I don't think there have been many characters in Redwall Survivor and Mossflower Odyssey that have been even come close to being as memorable and favored as Old One was. And I'm really glad you're not wasting those ideas that were unfortunately canned by the Rona, because they were so good, they deserve to be seen by a broader audience. And this is the chance, this is the new world, this is the unique contest. Let's
Exactly.
Old One was so special and unique, why not build off of it?
A lot of the culture that we see in Old One's app, we're gonna see not exactly taken from Old One's app, but we're gonna see it repurposed, and used in the prologues and in the character categories. We're gonna see some very familiar things if you've read Old One. And that's just because, I guess I just liked the ideas, and I thought, well, again, I was coming into this and I was trying to build, these two different cultures from the ground up, and I sort of started from a very similar place, because because the Northlands in the Northlands, I keep saying the Northlands, that's an actual Redwall place. In this, it's called the Whitelands. In the Whitelands, it's a very similar setting to where Old One came from. In my story, for Heaven Sent that I had planned out, and so there's a lot of similarities just because I'm building from a very similar position, right? Where I'm going from where I'm trying to create this culture in the North. So we are going to see some similarities there, and yeah,
it's going to be very exciting. I think this is going to end up being a very unique and special contest. I really hope so.
Oh yeah, that would be. We were talking about dream applications and stuff like that. I think that's my ultimate dream, is just for this contest to sort of stand out and have its own aura, I guess. When you think about, I want people to think about Survive Warpath and think about and feel something, that they don't feel with the other contests. And I'm hoping that that's what we're going to get.
Now, Vin, we've talked a lot actually about what your expectations are and what you're hoping for and what you're looking for. Is there anything that I haven't given you a stage yet to discuss about Warpath that you'd like to talk about, just to put it out there for potential contest writers and audience members?
Trying to think. I think we've covered a lot of what I wanted to go over. Yeah, I can't really think of it. This is a pretty extensive discussion, so I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I think people necessarily need to know that I won't be explaining in the next couple of days with the character category stuff. So yeah, I think it covers everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm sure I could find more to talk about, but it's not necessarily, vital information,
Now, Vin, I'm going to ask you the hardest question yet. I know we've talked a lot. We've gotten pretty deep into some things. But this one's a doozy, so feel free to think about this one. What's your favorite Redwall book?
Oh, well, that's actually not so much of a doozy as I thought it was going to be. Are you asking me what I think the best Redwall book is, or are you asking me my favorite? And
What's your favorite? What's your favorite out of all of the Redwall stories? What's your favorite?
I've got a hot take here. I've seen people say that it's a good book. I rarely see people say that it's their favorite, and by rarely I mean I've never seen anyone else say that this is their favorite book. But I really like Legends of Luke.
The Legend of Luke.
Yeah. It was not my favorite book growing up. I had a very different taste in Redwall books growing up as I do now. If you asked me when I was a kid, I probably wouldn't say that Legend of Luke even made top 10 for me.
It's 8 o'clock.
Oh, there's that guy again. When I was a kid, I used to like Agarung and Hyrule and Rackety Tam and Pearls of Lutra. And one thing you may notice about all of those is that most of them, Rackety Tam excluded, all have otters as their protagonist.
Yep.
I still am a big otter fan. I love otters. They're so cute. But
they are.
I was shameless an otter fan when I was a kid, and it wasn't even close for who my second favorite animal was, other than foxes. But foxes were always the bad guys. So I didn't like rooting for the bad guys, so I liked the otter books.
It makes sense. Your first MO character was Vin the Otter.
It was, yeah. Kentigern McRaff, I think, was the first character that I wrote that wasn't a mustelid or at all. Because I had my very first application was in MO1 with, I don't even remember what was on this application, but I do know it was a weasel named Pollux.
You're Pollock.
Pollux, yeah. That was a long time ago. And then in MO2, I obviously wrote Vin the Otter. MO3, just like MO1, I applied but didn't get in. And I applied as Skiz, who I think was a Pine Marten. He might have been a Weasel. I don't remember. And then you get to MO4, and all of a sudden it's Scottish Hare. Then MO5, it's back to Wolverine and Weasel again. Or maybe he was a Stoat. Smooth was a Stoat. I don't know. It's been a while since I wrote those characters. But I am a big Mustelid fan.
Everybody likes a woozle.
Yeah, everybody likes a woozle. And so that's why I liked those books as a kid. But I think, when I got older and I read the books, my favorite books sort of shifted around. And books that I never really liked when I was younger, like Salamandastron or Legend of Luke, they seemed kind of boring to me. Actually, were a lot more interesting. Just because I think they have interesting characters and interesting stories that sort of stand out to me now. When I think about Redwall bad guys, for Salamandastron, that would be a close second for me in terms of favorite books. Farrago the Assassin, one of the iconic bad guys of the series. But then you go to Legend of Luke, and Vilu Daskar, maybe not the most interesting bad guy, but then you have another antagonist, who maybe people don't think about as an antagonist very much right off the bat, but that's, I don't remember his name, but the otter who's a cannibal, right? He starts out as, this bad guy, and then he sort of has this redemption arc. And, that sort of thing, I think, really, really interests me. And
Yeah,
I don't know. I also like framing stories, stories that frame. I'm one of the crazy people who likes Chaucer's Canterbury Tales just because I think it's so fun how, all these mini stories in the main story of people just telling stories. So I enjoy the structure of Legend of Luke as well. But yeah, it's not usually one that you see tossed around as a favorite. So I think it might be kind of a hot take, but that's my favorite.
you're the first one on the show anyway to say Legend of Luke. So again, you're hitting those unique notes that no one else has touched yet.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm gonna wrap up now. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about Survivor Warpath. There's already a lot of buzz on the Redwall Survivor Discord. We're gonna see what happens next on the Redwall subreddit, Eulalia. I'm gonna post something on Twitter if you yourself haven't posted anything on Twitter.
I don't have Twitter, so I haven't been, although I might consider making one just to tweet about it. But yeah.
Not a bad idea. There is a good Twitter Redwall online community sect that's there. Cool. And of course the prologue, I'm going to post a link in the YouTube description. Please, my listeners, go check it out. Even if you don't think about applying, you should at least read the prologue because it reads really well. Old One, I'm going to post a link. Again, if you are thinking of applying, I do recommend you read Old One. It is, in my opinion, a perfect application for a Survivor contest, and it really encapsulates the energy of Warpath and what we've discussed today. So thank you so much, Vin. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you. I hope you had you're welcome. I hope you enjoyed yourself today. I
did. Yeah. Always a pleasure to talk about this contest. So I probably could have kept talking for another hour, even more. So yeah.
Well, you know what? Perhaps there'll be a part 2. Perhaps when the applications, the top 30, come about. You do know how I like to read those applications in silly voices.
I do know that. Yeah, I remember thinking when you and I think it was Aldridge who did the reading of Old One, just thinking, wow, it was really cool because I wrote it to be spoken aloud. And so to hear somebody speak it aloud in exactly the way that I had written it without me having to tell them, that was super cool. That was one of my highlights of that that Heaven Sent contest. So, yeah.
Good motivation for any people hoping and thinking about writing an application for Warpath. Foxy will read it out loud.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you to my listeners. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more about what's going on in the ROC. We're going to wrap up. So as always, stay safe and cheers.